Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the Islamic Vibes podcast. I'm your host Majid, and today I'm joined by my special guest, Brother Muttaqi Ismail, the founder and the host of the Islamic History podcast. Assalamu alaikum, brother, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Majid. Alhamdulillah, thank you for having me here. It's always great to be, always great to talk to you. And we have a lot to talk about. A lot has changed since the last time we've spoken. A lot of new things across the Dawah scene. But, I don't want to, I'll let you lead the conversation, but we have a lot to discuss. Alhamdulillah.
No, good stuff, bro. Good stuff. I mean, it's been a while. It's been a while, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last time we recorded the podcast was the one on slavery, which is actually kind of timeless. Okay. I think that was the last one. Yeah, I think that's kind of timeless because recently there's a lot of discussions about slavery and Islam and stuff like this, on the YouTube scene. So alhamdulillah, I was, from my point of view, I recorded something with Brother Muttaqi a while back. So that was good. But it's been a while, man. It's been a while.
Yeah, we had a conversation about Andrew Tate, I believe, at some point also. That was after the slavery one. Well, Andrew Tate, after he had first been arrested, I think, around.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't.
We didn't talk about that?
No, we didn't talk about that. Oh, I know we talked about Andrew Tate, and I think at that time you.
But not as a podcast, you mean?
I remember we mentioned him, and I think at that time you had some reservations.
Well, I wasn't sure about the Well, I've always had reservations about the accusations, but also we spoke about Jordan Peterson, and actually I think on the next episode, the brothers you have on, they mentioned it. But we spoke about Jordan Peterson. How I had my reservations about Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
From the beginning, yeah, because he was, we've been through all that. I don't want to rehash that up, but yeah, but it's fine. Alhamdulillah, no matter. When's the last time we talked? It's always good to talk again. Alhamdulillah.
It is, bro, and it's a pleasure to have you back on. Really
thank you.
Good to catch up with you, man. So yeah, I mean, there's loads to talk, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But first of all, just find out from yourself what's happening. It's been a while. What's new, what's on your mind, and then we'll kick things off.
Well, definitely one of the most interesting things that have happened the past couple of weeks was the great debate on Patrick Bet-David's podcast with Daniel Haqiqatjou and Jake the Metaphysician. I don't know his last name. I just know Jake the Metaphysician versus the other two, Robert Spencer and Rachid, whatever his name was, the so-called ex-Muslim. But yeah, that was interesting. The fallout from that, the tweets that came after it, it was it was really interesting. Now, I do understand Daniel Haqiqatjou's frustration with what he calls compassionate imams. I do understand his frustration with them, and I do believe that if the debate involves one of these compassionate imams, I don't want to give any names, because even though I may disagree with him, I still have a lot of respect for all the da'is that are doing their best. But still, if it was one of those guys doing this debate, it would have been an entirely different flavor. It would have been very, very different. I don't know if it would have gone over as well as it did if we have if the Muslim side was always on the defensive, was always trying to defend, and never going on the offensive. And honestly, to me, Daniel Haqiqatjou kind of held back a little bit, because I've seen him go at people. He kind of held back a little, but I guess he was trying to maybe he's just trying to be more accommodating. But what interested me was that one of the things I noticed was that, and I didn't watch the whole way through because it's like 2 hours long, but I have watched several clips of it. But one interesting thing I noticed about that was Patrick would ask a question or whatever, and I understand Patrick Bet-David, he's concerned about what's called woke culture, or the way the United States is going as far as
liberalism and
the over liberalization of the United States, of American culture, Western culture in general. And he sees that Muslims have had some success in resisting that, even for those of us who live in this country or even in the UK. We've had some success in resisting it. And so despite his disagreements with Islam, and I don't want to say he's Armenian, he's from Iran originally, and I understand the Armenians have had a long, somewhat troubled history with certain Muslim groups. We won't get into details about it, but I do understand that. But he sees a liberalism as a bigger threat than Islam, which is at least a good step forward. it's a good step forward for him. And also, I understand that he has a good relationship with Andrew Tate. I think that has helped as well. But anyway, he would say something to try and like do some sort of accommodation, and the Muslim side, Daniel and Jake, they would go along with that and try to extend a hand, and Robert Spencer and the other guy, they will automatically go on attack mode and try to attack Islam and everything. It wasn't a good look for them. It wasn't a good look, and I'm really glad Daniel Haqiqatjou was the further. Whatever, I know some people disagree with debatings, and I don't think it's necessarily haram. I don't think it's haram at all. I think it's necessary I don't think it's a tool for dawah. I don't think debating is a tool for trying to convince people to come to Islam. But Ahmed Deedat, he always, I know he's a old school for some of these young people may not remember him, but Ahmed Deedat, his thing was always, he used debates to defend Islam against those who are hostile, those who are actively trying to come into the Muslim community where he was in South Africa. And so I believe debate is good for defending Islam against those who would try to spread lies about it or try to say, whatever, rather spread lies about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or the Quran or anything. Debating is good for that. As a dawah tool, as far as trying to convince people, I don't know if it's necessarily good for that. But for self-defense or going on offense, I think it's necessary. And Allah knows best.
Yeah. I did actually watch all of it. I had to do it in 2 sittings. Okay. But yeah, to be honest with you, I agree with what you're saying. This was kind of a PR disaster for Robert Spencer, and as some people have been saying on Twitter or X, Sister Rachid, because there was just hot air from that direction, and it was purely emotional garbage. But I think, to be honest with you, originally, did you know that it wasn't supposed to be Jack and Daniel?
Yeah. It was supposed to be your guys from the UK.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But to be honest with you, I think the way it went, Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala works in mysterious ways. I don't think it could have gone any better from the Muslim point of view. I think what it showed was one side was intellectual, and also holding to the fundamentals of their deen, whilst Robert Spencer, he just hates Islam anyway, right? And even when he was trying to come across as intellectual, the stuff he was saying was nonsense. However, the Rashid guy, he was like a spare wheel on the show. What was the point of bringing him on? Because every time he spoke, it felt like somebody needed to play a violin, because he contradicted himself, and he didn't bring anything to the table. And I've heard other people say as well that it's funny how you have these ex-Muslims who are fascinated with Islam. Your identity may have been a Muslim. Now your identity should be something else, but they keep holding on to the identity ex-Muslim. Right. Surely it should be atheist, or it should be Christian, But nevertheless, in regards to the debate itself, I think debates generally are for the people viewing it. I think, most of the time the debates, it seems like both sides are kind of like defending their position. So I don't think there's much in a debate where you're actually going to convince the other person. I think both sides normally tend to come with a fixed position that they hold. However, what we do see is that the people watching the debate, they can see, and what would they see? They would see that, and I think Daniel and the brother Jake, I don't want to call him that really, but I don't know what his Islamic name is, but we'll call him Jake for now. Is it Jack or Jake?
Is Jake, his Twitter handle is Jake the Metaphysician. That's how I know him. So.
We'll call him Jake for now. But
Jake is short for Jacob. It's okay. Jacob.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think they played it very well, because I think even they knew there were certain buttons to push, and the way they held back was very diplomatic. Like you said, for example, when Patrick, when he asked, "Well, can you guys come together to deal with a common enemy?" And from the Muslim point of view, yeah, sure. Right, but the hatred that the other guys have for Islam, it was quite evident. But I mean, what I would say in conclusion is, what it showed is you had people who were coming from an intellectual angle, even they were, I mean, look, at the end of the day, if you had one of these other imams on, like, I mean, let's call them the compassionate imams, right?
Right.
The question about the apostasy laws and stuff like this, they would not have answered it in the way the brothers answered it, but they gave the context too, right? They would have definitely shied away from that. They were definitely shied away, and I think Robert Spencer and the other Rachid, I think they would have taken them for lunch. They would have eaten them.
I think that's what they were expecting.
That's what they were expecting.
I mean, I don't mean, but so many years, for so long, Muslims have been the representatives of the Muslim community have been making excuses for these things. Excuses for Aisha, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam marrying Aisha at her age, the apostasy ruling, the hudud of the various different types of hudud, jihad. I hate to say we because that wasn't me, but still, they represent me, so I guess we're here. Constantly making excuses for these things over and over and over again, rather than just, accepting it and accepting it and adding context to it, and making sure we take out the lies, because people do sometimes exaggerate these quote unquote controversial parts of Islam. But still, we accept it. Now, for certain things I can understand maybe giving more context to. For instance, the fate that was dealt to Banu Qurayza. I think Rachid brought that up after the Battle of the Trench, when the final Jewish tribe was mostly executed. There's lots to say about that, and I would have liked to add, if I had added context, I might have come across as a compassionate man. But there is more context to that. One of the things about that story that I find not troubling is the fact that it's not mentioned in the Quran. Most other, the expulsion of Banu Nadir and Banu Qaynuqa, I believe, those are both alluded to in the Quran. Both of them, but not this. But that event is not mentioned in the Quran. If I remember correctly, I don't know of any hadith that specifically mentions it. I could be wrong, but I've looked for it. I've seen hadith that allude to it, but not specifically mention the exact number and exact punishment and all that. So some of it is kind of, and also, that number is kind of high. For Medina at that time, which was just barely a village, when even if the entire Muslim community at that time was roughly about 1,400 people, maybe a little bit, give or take, or entire Muslim fighting force about 1,400 people, it's kind of hard to believe that Banu Qaynuqa had, 600 people, 700 people who could be executed at one time. It's a little difficult. And I do know that some of these numbers during this early Islamic period, if they're not mentioned in the Quran or Hadith, are sometimes exaggerated. These, weird numbers of Khalid ibn Walid, 40,000 Muslims fighting against 20,000, 250,000 Romans.
200,000. 200.
Yeah, that's a bit much. So some of these numbers are exaggerated from back then. But it's good. The way Brother Daniel handled it was good, because I would have gotten too deep into the historical part and all the craziness. So it was fine. But
I think what he tried to point out, the reason why he didn't probably want to go too much into it is because he knew that, the one who was accusing, he had a certain viewpoint. So he said, look, so I think what he tried to do was he tried to link it to treason, which it was treason. If we read the seerah, this was treason, because at the end of the day, this could have led to the destruction of the Muslims. They had a pact. Right. Okay. Now, we know this event happened. However, the finer details, we're not sure. We're not sure of the finer details, in all honesty. But it doesn't really matter. What we do know is that there was this tribe who colluded with the Quraysh and tried to, take out the Muslims, and they were dealt with. And I think this is something which we know about. Whether it was 600, whether it was 500, we don't. I mean, I don't really want to delve too much on this, but I did hear once, I speak to a brother who, very knowledgeable brother, and he did say to me once, and this is the only person I've ever heard from this. He said that in the what happened at Banu Qurayza, he was saying what I find odd is that if you look at the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's life, it almost seemed as if, you know, this event was out of character.
Right. Yeah.
You understand? You know, whether it's, for example, amnesty, for example, in Mecca or stuff like this. But I think, look, regardless, I mean, you know, whether, you know, it happened in that way or not, but what we do know is treason, and the reality is that even in today, in 2023, you can still, you know, be sentenced to death for treason.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's what they were doing. They were using these things and throwing at them. For example, they use the issue of, you know, the verses of the Bible. I mean, I'm to be honest with you, I'm not one to, if I'm ever going to debate with a Christian, for example, if I'm going to speak to a Christian, and I don't, this is not what I think is the way forward, but I know people do it, and alhamdulillah, it works because people do become a Muslim, and they see the falsehood of the Christian doctrine as it is today. But the way I see it is, you look at the Quran and you look at the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his dawah. You know, he wasn't, you know, the dawah was that this is the Quran, this is the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and, you know, if you doubt it, then bring a surah like it. Okay? Right. But what we see now is that you have these people, you know, the da'is, and they try to disprove Christianity from the Bible. And I'm thinking like, well, look, if you come from the Islamic point of view and say, look, let me prove to you Islam is the truth, and then that by default abrogates what you believe in. But what I liked was when they were quoting, when Brother Jake, when he was quoting the Old Testament in regards to, you know, killing the people, even the babies and stuff. And he said that, you know, is this inherently moral or immoral, right? And this was a great trap, because Robert Spencer said this is inherently immoral. So if this is immoral, this is coming from the source which you claim to be God.
Right.
Which by default makes you God immoral. So you know what it is? To be honest with you, when I was checking the comment fields, you had a lot of Christians on there who were actually saying that the two Muslims gave a better account of Christianity than the two guys that were apparently Christian.
Right. Because the thing is that even though they claim to be talking about the two Christian side, even though they claim to be conservative, right-wing Christians, or trying to hold on to traditional values of Western Christianity, the fact is they judge Islam based upon liberal values. They're not judging, and I think they brought that up too. They're not judging Islam by traditional Christian values. They're judging Islam by modern liberal values, because if you go back 150 years, there's not really much, or even maybe 200, even not 150 years, except for you go back 150 years, women in the West did dress a little bit looser than Muslim women. They were still way more covered up. They may not have covered their hair, but they're still way more covered than they are now. It would have been very similar in many respects. Maybe not United States, but if you go
in the UK, for example, you see pictures from, you know, 1890 or even probably even
right. Long dresses.
Where long dresses, the heads are covered, and you would think this is the khimar and hijab. This is the jilbab and the himar.
Right. And you know, and especially if you go to Christian nations outside of the West, like in Africa or in South America, it'd be even more traditional if you go back 200 years from now. So the actual many of the moral, and we know this, and this is not me trying to be a compassionate imam or anything, but many of the moral traditions between both religions are the same, because it all ultimately comes from Allah, even though it's been corrupted by some of the previous by Ahlul Kitab. It still comes from the same source. It's just that, you know, alhamdulillah, Muslims have been able to hold on to the tradition so far better than the others have. So
yeah, well, obviously, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He protects the Quran. So we know that the Quran is there, and also, you know, if you think about the great works of the early scholars, you know, who kind of defined the usul al-fiqh, who collected the hadith and stuff like this, you know.
Right.
You know, I was speaking to on a podcast. I'm not sure if you had time to watch it, but I was at Ustad Lotfi Abdul Rahman on the previous episode, and he mentioned this one thing when he mentioned that there were in hadiths, for example, people would travel from, somewhere to Medina just to have access to one hadith. And now we have full volumes on our phones and stuff like this, right? So alhamdulillah, but all of this really is, if you're talking about sadaqah jariyah, subhanallah, cha-ching, 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 may Allah bless them with Jannatul Firdaus, in the highest level, because the work that they did, they definitely set their legacy, man, and that's what we talk about.
Right. I mean, it is an amazing thing. My son was asking me, my son was asking me about hadith deniers yesterday. We were coming back from Jummah, on our way back home from Jummah, and he asked me about the Quraniyun, or the Quranists in English, or people who only go by the Quran. He was asking me why people go that route, and we don't have to go deep into this, but my response to him, I have taken a few classes on the science of hadith, and it is complicated. It is, at least for me, it was very complicated, and it is definitely a man-made science. But the intent was there, and the fact that these scholars who compiled the hadith, the various hadith, them and their students and all those, the many men and a few women too, who put in the effort of preserving the teaching of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Their intention was to preserve which is basically revelation, even though it's not directly revelation like the Quran. It is revelation, and it is necessary, because there's no way I can't say there's no way, Allah can do whatever he wants, but if the Quran had to deal with every single facet of life, it would be 1,000,000 pages long if it dealt with every single facet of life. And much of the details about Islam we only get from the hadith. We have one of the few facets of life that the Quran goes into detail with is divorce. But most other things, it doesn't really go into deep detail about. Birth, janazah, that's from hadith. Aqiqah, when the child is born, that's from hadith. Marriage is from hadith. The Quran gives a few details about the gift and everything like that, but the mahar and things like that, but really the details come from the hadith. So there's no way to have Islam the way it is right now, where it's a life system. It's a way of life, and not just because I don't want to bring up other faiths, but it would be like we have to make stuff up on our own, like a lot of other faiths are doing. A lot of other people have to do. If we try to only use the Quran and leave everything else out, how are you going to make salat? The Quran does mention ruku' and sajda and things like that, but the finer details of the salat all come from the hadith. Ramadan fasting has much of the basis, not very much to do with Ramadan and fasting, but still, zakat, you cannot do zakat without the hadith, because the Quran just says pay zakat. It doesn't give you the amounts or the different situations, the nisab. All these things come from the hadith. So you can't have this full Islamic life that we have that is so perfect and that has lasted through, massacres and world wars and famines and pandemics and all the things that Islam has survived through, being wiped out. I know people are going to go to this, being nearly wiped out, having caliphs overthrown and puppet caliphs and puppet kings, all these things that Muslim world has experienced in the past 1,400 years. It's been able to survive mostly because it has this core of the Quran and the Hadith that holds firm, and the scholars that have managed to perpetuate that. And of course, it's all by design. It's all all part of the qadr of Allah, all by His will. But still, it's important to have the Hadith. And I know I went totally off tangent. Didn't mean to bring it up. When you mentioned the Hadith, it just came. That discussion I had with my son yesterday came to my mind.
No, it's an important topic. It's an important topic. Obviously, I think it's one that needs due preparation. But it's funny you mentioned it, because only last night I was watching a video about a debate between a Muslim and a Quran denier, even though he himself was saying
Hadith denier, Quran denier.
No, sorry, Hadith denier. But maybe why it slipped out Quran denier is because the reality is this: if you are a Hadith denier, you are a Quran denier. Right. And because the thing is first and foremost, I think this is something which it's not coincidental. I think from the top level, the people who have enmity and who are against Islam, they understand that, in fact, in the entirety of Islam, really, in its practical form, in its practical form is derived from Hadith, right? So if the Quran is just say, the guidance, the Hadith is the practical steps on how to, follow this guidance.
Right.
Okay. So rather than fighting Muslims, rather than taking over their lands, let's do it, in a way where we actually can divorce the Quran and the Sunnah. And the reality is that if you divorce the Quran and the Sunnah, what you have left isn't Islam. So the people who believe this are not Muslims. Okay. And like the point you made, about the Salah, because the sort of like question answer I was watching the other night, the brother asked the question, how many times do you pray? And the Quranist said 3 times, because it's mentioned in the Quran. So he said, how long do you pray for? And he was saying, well, we pray for, like, it talks about this period, this time, we pray for all that time, right? So you're talking a couple of hours. Bizarre. So then he said, how do you pray? Obviously, as we know, okay, there's some guidance in the Quran, but the proper details of, what you need to say and when and stuff like this is from the Sunnah, the Hadith.
Right.
And basically what he said, really, this is up to the person who's leading the Jama'ah. Basically, he can make it up in any way he wants.
Yeah.
Right? So it is something that's been promoted, and hence why your son mentioned it. And the reason why maybe it can seem appealing is, I think, in 2 ways. For someone who is, I would argue, coming from a sincere place as such, Islam is under attack. There's the political side of Islam that's under attack, and there's certain elements of Islam, whether it's to do with the hudud and stuff like this, apostasy laws or adultery laws and the had and stuff like this. And a lot of these things, where did they come from? You don't find them in the Quran. You find them in the Hadith. Right. So sometimes maybe it's like a mechanism to try to like keep yourself in the fold of Islam by saying, actually, I can't defend these things. So actually, you know what? These are written by man. I'm going to take the Quran, and Allah says in the Quran, He's going to protect this book. So I know this is from Allah, and the Hadith are from man. And they could make errors, and so I'm not going to include it. So if someone then raises the issue to them about apostasy or about, this and that, they can easily say, yeah, I don't believe in those hadiths as well, right? And the other way is where, it's more mischievous or devious, is where basically people don't want to follow the traditional version of Islam, right? They want to just make things up, like you said. So I think they're the sort of two sides you get. But why it's dangerous is because if you've got this attack on Islam and certain things about Islam, and Muslims are not equipped in a in an intellectual manner to rebuke and to fight back, then the easiest way is to just turn around and say, well, I don't believe in this hadith. And actually, the debate that the brother was having with the Quranist, he said, "Oh, I don't."
Muslim Lantern, brother from was that Muslim Muhammad Ali Muslim Lantern?
Yes.
Okay. I haven't seen the video yet, but it has been popping up in my stream. I keep meaning to.
Yes, that's the one. I watched it last night. Muhammad Ali.
Okay. Yeah. I like his debate. Go on, let you finish the story. I'm sorry.
So basically, what he said was, and this is this is why these people don't think. He said, "Look, I believe in the Quran, but I don't believe in the Hadith because they are from man." So he said, "Well, that's strange because the same people who preserved the Quran and then narrated it, and we have it today, they're the same people who are narrating the Hadith."
Right.
And then he was like, "Well, okay, actually, I don't deny all Hadith. I only accept the Hadith that are in line with the Quran." But this is again bogus, because if the Hadith you accept are in alignment with the Quran, then you don't need the Hadith. You just need the Quran anyway. So anyway, it's just a bit coincidental that you brought this up, and I was watching these videos, but it's worth watching because, I think for people who might not know too much about the Deen or these arguments, I think they can sound compelling to the right person. Like, they can really sound compelling. A lot of the things that don't agree with the modern liberal order, they're from Hadith.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's the easy route to just say, well, actually, yeah, these are written by a man 300 years ago. But people need to research. Actually, the hadith were even written down at the time of the Prophet,
Mm-hmm.
sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So people just have this mindset, like similar to Christianity, how the Gospels and stuff were written hundreds of years later, and that some guy turned up and he said 300, 400 years later, I'm going to collect these and I'm going to write these down. However, he was contacting people who had heard it, but also many people had actually written it down as well. So it's a deeper topic. It's a deeper topic.
Yeah. I agree. It's a good topic though. But yeah, probably one. I don't want to say anything wrong, so I don't want to get too deep into it because it really requires a certain level of scholarship, and I'm not at that scholarship level. So it's really.
Actually, to be honest with you, I would disagree with that.
Really?
Reason why is because the command, the ayat in the Quran where it tells you about I have sent down the guidance and the hikmah, follow the messenger, what he gave you, and leave what he hasn't.
Right.
And refer to Allah and his messenger, Allah and in countless places, Allah and his messenger. The one who disobeys his messenger is disobeying Allah. So basically, and this is why we say that if you deny hadith, you deny the Quran, because you are denying clear-cut ayat of the Quran, which is telling you that you follow the Prophet. So what it basically boils down to, and not like you said, maybe we can do this another time after doing a bit more research, is was there a revelation apart from the Quran? And we believe there was.
Yeah.
Which was we say hadith, and I think that's where people get confused. It's the sunnah.
Right.
Hadith is just what we say is the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, those things that he said, and those things that he sort of like remained quiet upon, where he gave his tacit approval, right? But generally, it's the sunnah. And this is the hikmah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in the Quran, when Allah says that, then he will teach this to the people. So I don't think, to be honest with you, you have to be at a scholarly level to understand this. But if you don't know even this much, I think you will struggle because they're very sly in the way they come across, and that's why if you watch that video, I know I'll keep going. I'm not plugging this in, but if you watch that video by Muhammad Ali, if we're talking about the same one, the reason why sometimes he might seem a bit patronizing and he might is because he knows that these people are not genuine. So it's not like a random guy you've met and he's like, these people know what they're talking about. They know what they're twisting. They've heard the other arguments before, but they just don't want to accept it. So sometimes, he's a bit patronizing, but that's because he knows he's not speaking to the normal public. He's speaking to people who hold an idea which probably deep down they don't even know. They know it's not correct.
Right. Well, this may be a hang up with me. I prefer to really understand what I'm talking about when I do a discussion. I prefer to even like sometimes a couple of times you suggested ideas for podcast. I'm not really comfortable with that, mostly because I don't really have enough information about it, and I'm reluctant to really go on the record about saying something I haven't really fully researched. And so with this topic, I've never really researched I have anecdotal evidence, anecdotal information from different Quraniyun or anti-Hadith Muslims that I've come across, but I haven't really delved into except that conversation I had with my son yesterday was probably the first time I had a long conversation about that in years. So it's just me. This just might be a personal hang up with me that I really prefer to make sure I have as much information as I can. And that's just part of me doing a podcast, a history podcast. I'm always trying to gather, always reading something. And, I've been called out so many times for missing details in the podcast. I try to sometimes overcompensate by trying to have as much information as I can. So with me, I prefer to just have, to make sure I know what I'm talking about, make sure I understand the topic from both sides. And
well, to be honest with you, bro, I don't think that's just you. That's the right way. That's the right way. The only reason why maybe I've added a little bit, probably more than yourself, is because I have read into this.
Okay.
So I have read into this, because it's something which is not, I wouldn't say it's becoming popular, but there are a lot of people pushing certain ideas, especially when it comes to ruling system of Islam and stuff like this. This is not defined. It's all made up. You can just live your life in any way. So we get this type of this attack. So, but nevertheless, again, like I said, maybe it's one where if we both wanted to do a topic on this, we'll both do extra research, and I'll watch this back, and if I made any mistake, then all the mistakes are from myself, and inshallah I'll correct it. But yeah, but no, your approach is the right approach. Is the right approach. We should only talk about what we know about, especially when it comes to, I think, the deen.
Yeah. That's two things. I'm gonna make sure I don't. A couple of weeks ago, I gave a khutbah, and the khutbah was about the meeting between Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam and the Queen of Sheba, commonly known as Bilqis. And I went through the story, and then I go through the story, and then I started talking about the lessons of the story. The lessons of the story is basically this was a form of giving dawah. The Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam was giving dawah to the Queen of Sheba, and what lessons we can learn about giving dawah. And one of the lessons I pulled from this that I hope got across is that you don't really have to have a lot of knowledge to give dawah. Because Prophet Sulaiman was one of the most knowledgeable people. He was the most knowledgeable person of his time. And yet when he invited the queen, he didn't give a long bullet pointed list of all the reasons she should become Muslim or she should accept Islam. He didn't give all the reasons or this great, thought experiment about why her people worshiping the sun was incorrect. He simply said, come to me and submit as Muslims. That's it. And then, and that's that's a very simple thing. And so my advice to the people who were listening to the khutbah was, if all you know is La ilaha illallah, then just say that. That's all you know. And anything that comes, but also be careful about not making things up on the fly, because you can make mistakes. People will naturally come to you with questions. And if you don't know the answer, be humble enough. Don't let your ego get in the way to say, I don't know that. I don't know. And I'll get some information. I'll ask someone, or here's a email or a phone number of a sheikh or imam that I believe has the information. They can probably tell you more. So I know we're going to get into, but another thing I wanted to mention, I want to, have you heard of he's not new, but Shahid Bolsen. Have you heard his
Shahid.
He suddenly popped up on the scene, and all of a sudden he's in my feed on YouTube, and it seems like he's been around for a while, because I looked at some of his videos are well over a year old, but I don't know, somehow he got caught up in the algorithm for everybody at the same time, and suddenly his videos are everywhere. And well,
do you think that's a coincidence, bro? I'm not saying you're big on your tech and you're on your internet and that knowledge, yeah, but I'm sure you have a basic understanding of how algorithms and stuff like this on the internet work.
Yeah. I have a basic understanding.
Are we naive to believe it's a coincidence that someone can blow up in such a way that he's on everyone's feed?
It does seem kind of very coincidental. It does seem very very ironic. I mean, so far, I didn't. I want to make sure. I want to be careful about saying anything negative about him, because I don't really know him that well. I don't know him at all personally. I only have what I have from the clips. Much of what he says, I agree with. I'm fine with. I think he's more into the geopolitical part of it, of how Islam works as a governmental system and that goes back into what you said earlier. That's what reminded me of it when you mentioned, Islam as a government system. I think he's more into that. Some of his, I don't want to say attacks, but some of his criticisms of the Dawah scene, it might not be necessary. I could say, he probably, maybe, but that's up to him. But much of what he says that I listened to so far as just the geopolitics of Islam, I'm okay with. I kind of agree with a lot of what he says. He doesn't really delve too much so far as I've heard, as far as dealing with the religion, as far as that. And Googling his name brings up all sorts of strange accusations. So I don't want to delve too much into that, but it's interesting. It is interesting that suddenly everyone started learning about him at the same time. So it is interesting.
Yeah, what I would say is, I mean, to be honest with you, I've had the luxury of speaking about this topic with many other brothers who who kind of feel the same. So what we see about Shahid Bolsen is that, I think there's a tried and tested formula. Okay. I'm talking in general here. I'm talking about in general here. Okay. Is that you build a profile by saying good things. And then when you've got some sort of following, then you test the waters by saying things which are not correct. Okay. Now, when it comes down to Shahidbolsen, I would say that what have I noticed? I first came across one of his videos I can't remember, it was a while back now, maybe a year or less. And it was about why is it when it comes to homosexuality that, people are fixated on using the identity of what they want to do, what they like to do in their bedroom, and making it as their identity. It doesn't make sense. And I thought, boy, this guy is on the ball. Like, it was like really good. And then after that, videos were coming out and he was, attacking liberalism and attacking the hypocrisy and stuff like this. And I was like, look, this guy is on point. But recently he's been saying things which I totally disagree with. For example, he praises the current regimes, the UAE and these type of regimes. Okay. He even goes as far as to saying that the Muslim countries are Islamic. Okay. He attacks the concept of Khilafah. He attacks, in fact, from his point of view, there is no Islamic ruling system. And in his last video, where I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he made a mistake, but he said, and as someone who's recorded a podcast on the life of the Prophet ﷺ, as you have, what he said was totally incorrect. He said after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, the companions, they got together to decide how they're going to govern. This is not true. The truth is, as you know, the Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Umar radiallahu anhu, they heard that the Ansar had gathered at Bani Saqifa, and they were electing a leader. The issue wasn't a leader. And if you look at the discussion that followed, the discussion that followed was not about how we're going to implement Islam and how we're going to live our lives. It was about, who's going to be the leader, where the Ansar even said, look, you will have one and we will have one. And then Abu Bakr then said, no, this is not right, because, we can only have one leader. And then they united behind Abu Bakr. Obviously, from Quraysh and stuff like this, right? Again, this is factual. And this is just one example. So from my point of view, being on I would say the Dawah scene, and certainly from the political side, his message that he is saying is extremely dangerous, extremely harmful in regards to what Islam is, as a system that can govern life and that can change the world to a better place. His message is actually anti that. So as I see it, the algorithm, as you know as well, it's nowadays you can, if you can post, it's like this one brother I saw a short clip on TikTok, and he said there's this one woman, and she has I can't remember, millions and millions of followers, right? Millions and millions of followers on TikTok. And in all of her videos, all the videos, you don't even see her face. In every video is just showing her backside in different locations of the world. And she is killing it from the numbers point of view, right? The amount of money she's making, the amount of money she's making from these videos, the TikToks, is on a next scale. And he was talking about how, look at the world today, you could have even some of the best well-known da'is, scholars even, they can't compare when it comes down to the followers. It's why? Because the algorithm is pushing a message which is counter to the betterment of the world, right? So I've been banned on platforms. I've been blocked, right? By saying things which, are not even that bad, right? From their point of view, right? So that's why, bro, honestly, move the person aside. Let's not, okay, just for now, we're not talking about Shahidbolsen or whatever. When you see, we're not talking about compassionate imams, some of those in North America, right? What you see is when platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, where these these platforms are not only assisting you with the algorithm, when they're pushing your content. And as I was discussing with the Ustad Lotfi, he mentioned, he said, look, because he does cybersecurity, he said, if you had a brand new phone, totally clean, and you went to a cafe and you hooked up to their internet, brand new profile, and you just typed in like something about, I want to learn about Islam, he goes, the same few people are going to be at the top of the list. So what you see is that, you know, when you're looking at a time where certain people are being pushed, helped by the algorithm, basically by these big players, you gotta, you know, we can't be naive. I think we need to think back more. Okay, you know, why would that be? So that's what I would say. You know, when someone explodes on your on the screen, you look at, for example, Sheikh Anwar al-Awlaki.
Yeah,
they totally took everything off the internet with his content. You can't even find it anymore. I'm not saying, you know, I'm not saying his views are right or wrong, whatever. Even though his seerah is probably the best seerah, audio seerah that I've heard, right?
Yeah, it is.
Right, but nevertheless, totally purged. He was purged. Forget take. He was purged, totally purged from the internet. So these same people are pushing some and taking others off. It's got to make you think. It's got to make you think.
Right.
That's all I would say.
I understand. I understand that. I'm not pushing back, but I just want to add, because I haven't heard everything. I haven't really listened to a lot of his deep political stuff, so I don't know. I can't really say much about some of the things he said, but some of the things that you mentioned that he said. However, there is, and this is probably going to a longer conversation about the Mongols and Mughals and stuff like that. There is sometimes with Muslims, I think there's a disconnect between the ideal of political Islam or Islam as a political force and the practical implementation of it. And there's a poll I had on my channel once. I asked people, maybe earlier this year, I asked my followers, my channel followers, not my followers personally, but I asked them, imagine if you were the Abbasid Caliph in the early 13th century and you knew the Mongols were coming to attack Baghdad. You knew they were coming, and they ordered, and the Hulagu Khan sent you a messenger ordering you to submit as a vassal. And if you submit as a vassal, you have to pay him a tribute. You have to pay him a tribute. You may have to supply soldiers to his army, who will then go ahead and fight other Muslims. But he'll leave you alone, and you'll be fine, and that's it. If you refuse, you know for certain, you know that there's almost no chance of you winning if you refuse. And if you refuse, you know that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Muslim women will be raped. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Muslim children and babies will be killed. Muslim women will be taken off to Mongolia, different parts of the Mongol Empire, will become concubines for pagans, basically, for the rest of their lives. About 1 million Muslims will be killed. If you decide to stand, which one of those would you take? And my purpose of that was to put people into it's one thing to say this is how Islam, we should practice Islam, not practice Islam, governed by Islam, because practicing Islam is fairly easy. Governing by it is difficult. And when you have that, there is a concept of you heard of realpolitik, where, they have the ideal of what you want to do, but when you are faced with the reality of lives depending on your decisions, sometimes it's not easy to make what we think is the ideal decision. And that's a hard decision to make. How you're going to, it's not easy to say, I'm going to give soldiers to help these pagans fight against non-Muslims. At the same time, you're thinking about tens of thousands of Muslim women being dragged off to be concubines, if not killed, and, it's a hard decision. It's not an easy decision to make. And it was roughly 50-50 because,
Okay.
some people was like, I can't agree to help fight other Muslims. But a lot of people and a lot of people acknowledge that, yeah, it's a difficult decision. These are the decisions that a lot of political leaders have. And I'm not saying we all have our gripes about political leaders and the decisions that they make and how they've done things. And, my only point is on this is that, it's difficult. It's not easy decisions, and anything you make, it's hard to say that. It's a hard choice to make between, and I know it's going to sound crazy. Am I pleasing Allah? Or am I going to save my people? Sometimes you might not be certain which one is which. You might not be saying, save my people, pleasing Allah, or by following what I think is the right thing to do, pleasing Allah. Is being brave and accepting martyrdom and knowing that martyrdom is wipe out you, your family, millions of, maybe not millions, but hundreds of thousands. It's a difficult decision to make. And my only point was that just to help people understand how the difficulty of ruling and why it's always strange to me how so many people fight and kill and connive and scheme to become the leader. And then once they get there, they have all these difficult decisions to make. And the slightest thing, could lead to the deaths of thousands, and it's all in your head.
No, of course.
It is not easy.
Of course.
So I haven't listened to everything he said, but I think I do want to, if you can, I do want to listen to some of what he said and try to put it more into that and try to listen to it from a different perspective. Because I'll acknowledge I was probably on the high of his earlier talks that were all, pro-Islam, anti-liberalism, and things like that. And maybe I've overlooked some of the other things he said that are kind of questionable.
Bro, if he stick to that sort of stuff, that's what he built his credibility on. But now when you are promoting, when you are saying, where you are kind of like backing normalization with the illegal state of Israel, it's like there's certain red lines. So whether he exposed himself too early, or whether they're just testing the waters, how do people feel on the ground? Because obviously, there's a lot kicking off with Saudi and stuff like that with the normalization right now, right? Yeah. So there's certain things which you can't defend, but the stuff which are to do with the liberalism stuff like that, it was amazing because you never heard Muslims so confidently, because like you said, Muslims are always on the defensive, very sheepish, right? Someone so articulate, straight to the point, amazing. But again, like I said, I can only comment on the things that I've seen, and the pattern seems very similar, where someone's profile is built and then certain things are said. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's not going down that route. And in regards to what you mentioned about the ruling, I'm not entirely sure where you're going with that. But what I would say is that 100% is hard. It's hard, bro. 100%. You wouldn't want to envy. You wouldn't want to envy those people. You wouldn't want to be in that position, because the same people who fight to get into that position then have to protect themselves for the same people who are fighting them, like they fought the previous ruler. It's frigging like a rat race. It never ends. But what I would say is, when we're talking about the current rulers, right? For me, these excuses, they don't wash with these current people, because here you're not talking about people who have no political baggage. You're talking about people who, from the end of the Ottoman state, these dynasties who were given power, who serve a certain agenda. In fact, if there was a country where, just say Kuwait, for example, Kuwait, right? It's Kuwait is neither here or there. You know what I mean? It's just doing its thing, right? But when you have UAE, who is funding, and this will be shocking to you, but I can send you the reports afterwards if you want, that a lot of the far right movements in the West are being funded by places like UAE directly from the top. These people are normalizing with the illegal state of Israel. These people are fighting Islam, political Islam. They're fighting the rise of Islam. They are pushing secularism. There's a video I posted on TikTok where he was a UAE ambassador to US. He said, look, my belief and the belief of my leaders is that Islam and state, religion and state should be separate. That statement is kufr. I'm not talking about him, but the statement is kufr. So when you're talking about some guy who's just maybe got a little tribe and, he's not implementing Islam, whatever, may Allah make it easy for him and, and understand his challenges and reward him accordingly. But here we're talking about, bro, people who are actively fighting Islam, right? And I can't give those people that luxury of making those excuses for them, because it's impossible for them to not know what they're doing.
Right.
But like I said, I'm not sure. I'm presuming where you were going with that point, and I could be shooting in the wind, or shooting in the dark, as they say.
Right. But it's not about the current leadership, because between the different various Muslim dynasties I've researched, and I think most of them were corrupt. Most of them would not have stood the muster. There have been a few good leaders within each dynasty, but most of the leaders, most of the Muslim leaders, with a few exceptions, have been fairly corrupt, and they've been.
They may have been corrupt as individuals.
Yeah.
But what were they implementing on the
in most cases, though, they were used in almost all cases. They promoted Islam, or they at least, with the exception of Prophet Akbar the Great. But,
bro, when I was listening to your podcast, and to be honest with you, I want to start this chat on your podcast, but we went into other topics, which is great because Alhamdulillah, brilliant. Because season 8, season 9, and this is a plug now as well, that guys definitely listen to the Islamic History podcast. Season 8, season 9 is kind of mind blowing as well, because there was that time when Babur getting ready to fight the Rajputs, and he said, "Oh Allah, I'm gonna stop drinking alcohol now." You're like, wait a minute, right? What's going on here? But as you're saying, a lot of these rulers, they had bad practices. However, when it came to ruling and the society, they knew nothing but Islam. They only knew this. So, but that's different. Those people are still different, and they are a million times better than the people we have currently.
Right. Anyways, any leader who's
back to your point. Sorry.
Oh yeah. Any leader who's actively promoting the destruction or minimization or secularization of Islam, then those are people that we hope for their downfall, and may Allah take care of them in the best way. But my only point was to say that I guess I just want people to say that the mantle of leadership is not easy, and sometimes there are compromises that we have to make that may
100%, bro.
Feel they don't taste good initially, but no regime that's actively promoting the destruction of Islam or the secularization of Islam or anything like that, no support for them as well. But generally speaking, because it's common to hear Muslims gripe about Muslim leadership, and my point is just to understand that the decisions that they make are never easy, and I'm not a madkhali or anything. Let's support your Muslim leader no matter what. I'm not saying that. But
I hope not, bro. I hope not.
No. I'm not that. But understand that sometimes they have to make difficult decisions that you have to hold your nose to. And I'm not talking. I don't mean normalization of Israel. That's not one of those decisions I mean that they have to make. But sometimes it does require negotiating with your enemy that you hate. Sometimes you have to do those sort of things in order to sometimes sit back, rebuild, give your army a rest, give your people a rest from destruction.
A prime example, you could throw in there is the case of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahimahullah. When he made the deal with the Richard.
Yeah.
That truce. So there were still lands, Muslim lands, that he hadn't liberated, and he had made a truce with them. But it was because they were kind of tired. They were exhausted. Right. They both wanted a way out. Right. So like you're saying, you have to make difficult decisions. And again, if you think about it from a point of view of just from a family point of view, a father, that responsibility you have, that shepherd, you're shepherd of your family, right? It's not easy. You got to make hard decisions, right?
Right.
But here you're talking about the shepherd of a nation, of millions, if not billions of people, right? How are you gonna please everyone? How are you it's gonna be difficult, and that's why may Allah make it easy for them. And let's just hope that the people who get this position of leadership can use it to better their own akhirah, because you can easily destroy it. You can easily destroy it.
Right. It says, this the desire for man's desire for power, I think, is very destructive, and it's something that once you realize the responsibility that comes along with it, it's not something that I mean, if it's thrust upon you, you got to take it. You got to do the best of it. But to fight for it, to fight and kill and throw everything at it to get it, it boggles the mind why some people do that. But it has happened. It will continue to happen.
Well, I guess it's there's the downside of it, but also the upside of it. I mean, the wealth, the respect,
that's true.
The women, the luxuries. So it's like, maybe to some people it's worth it. But however, what it would show then, and I think this should be an appreciation for us in history, when we look at Muslim rulers or even governors and even judges, for example, that this type of responsibility is not cut out for everyone. And the people who served in these positions, they would have made mistakes, because we're human, we're infallible. We're fallible. But may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept and make sure that the good outweighs the bad, because it's not easy, and not everyone has, I mean, I don't know how to say this in a pleasant way, but not everyone has the courage or even the kahunas, as they say, to take on these roles and responsibilities. I think it's for a certain type of person, and the ones who make the best of it, I think they've done well, and the ones who don't, but they tried their best, I'll accept that, because they gave it their best shot, and but then there's also those who became corrupted, and I guess they should not have taken the role in the first place.
Right. You mentioned about the personal failures of some of these rulers. I'm like, the Mughals are on my mind right now, because that's what I'm doing research on. And Jahangir, who was Akbar's son, I believe, Emperor Jahangir, with the exception of Aurangzeb, most of the Mughal empires were alcoholics and addicted to opium. And Jahangir was no different. And when he became emperor, he passed a law banning alcohol and opium, but he was still taking it all the time himself. So much so that he pretty much, delegated almost all imperial functions to his wife, Nur Jahan, and let her handle pretty much everything.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's going to come out in a couple of days, inshallah. But yeah, he was.
But actually, a quick question is, one of the different things, when I think of the Mughals, and I think I mentioned to you before that apparently I'm descendant of
they have quite a few wives, so it's very likely.
Right. So
lots of wives and concubines.
Whenever I talk about for example, when I talk about Ottomans, I will say Islamic rule. When I think of Mughal rule in India, I say Muslim rule. I don't call it Islamic rule, because even when they were ruling, the rule was different to in other places where they never really implemented the Sharia, did they?
Not fully. No, they had some aspects of the Sharia.
Aspects.
Yeah, elements. But got to understand that the difference is the Mughals were a minority ruling over a non-Muslim majority. Yeah, so even today, still India is still primarily Hindu. It was less so then, before the partition, but definitely now is definitely more so. But even then, or going all the way back to the Delhi Sultanate that Babur wound up overthrowing, and even before them, the Muslims, the Deccan Sultanates and all the Muslim kingdoms and sultans that were there before then, they had to approach things differently. And even with Muawiyah, when the Muslims conquered Syria, and Muawiyah eventually moved the capital from Medina to Damascus, the Muslims were still a minority during his period of time. Now, of course, a few hundred years later, Islam became the majority, but during his time, the Muslims were the minority. And it was a Muslim Arab minority ruling over a Greco-Roman Christian majority. He was very lenient with I could see some of the same things that the Mughals had to do. The Mughals had to do in India. Muawiyah had to do the same thing. Now his son, Muawiyah's son, changed things a little bit. He was more strict.
Just on that point, before I don't forget, from what I understand, when Islam spread and to Syria wouldn't have been no different, that the Sharia was established even over the people, because generally even over North Africa, and you've done this as well in your studies, in North Africa it took maybe a few generations for people to really become Muslim, right? The Sharia was established. However, the sort of like the flexibility was in the religious matters of those people. There would in that respect there was no enforcement, but the society would have been governed by the rules of Sharia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The well, as far as now with Muawiyah, there's with the Umayyad Khilafat before the later years of it, Umayyad Khilafat was only about 100 years or so, so it didn't last that long. But the few earlier years with Muawiyah's son was not Yazid, but Yazid didn't last that long. But the one after after Ibn Zubayr was defeated and Abdul Malik was the first one. That's it. Abdul Malik wound up defeating Ibn Zubayr and wound up reestablishing the Umayyad dynasty after the brief Ibn Zubayr period. Abdul Malik was the one who began to more or less implement Islam in Syria. Even though Muslims were still a minority in Syria at the time, he was the one who began to implement it more and became much more forceful with Islam as being the state religion. Whereas Muawiyah was from the time of, he was a companion basically. He was a Sahaba. So he was very much into the whole tribal networks. He cooperated with the various Christian, somewhat Arabized, Romanized Arabs of Damascus and Syria. He collaborated with them. He married into their families and everything. And there was even some of the early documents from that period even state that the Christians weren't really sure if the Muslims were not Christian. They considered them to be just a different branch of Christianity. The division didn't really become, I'll say the Christians, I think the Muslims probably knew, but the Christians didn't really confirm the difference between Muslims and Christians of Syria until like Abdul Malik's time. And so that was several years after Muawiyah died. But my point is that Muawiyah was more of a tribal leader. Even though he ruled this vast empire, he was very much from the Quraysh. He was from the time of Prophet Muhammad SAW. So he had that same tribal network where he dealt with people with gifts, with handshake deals. So it's not really a handshake deal, but you know what I mean? Very verbal agreements, trying to pull people in through bribery, for lack of a better word, or by just being accommodating to them. And so he didn't, and also the Muslims were a minority at that time, even more so.
I will double check that, but like I said, from my understanding, especially you're talking about the capital of the Islamic State,
right?
And to presume that the Sharia was, because also remember one thing as well, if the Arabs were to rule by anything other than Islam, it would be paganism, because that's all they knew, right? So I think I will look in, because even, for example, just to come to my mind, even if you think about when the Umayyad treaty between Umar radiallahu and the high priest, or
Patriarch of Jerusalem.
That's right. It was kind of like made clear about the rules of the Muslims and the non-Muslims and the Christians and so on. So to be honest with you, that's kind of news to me that they would have allowed things to go on as usual. From what I understand is that Islam would have been implemented on the people, and this is why we saw mass conversions over generations anyway, because they witnessed the reality of Islam, the justice of Islam firsthand. However, in regards to their personal rituals which didn't affect the societal laws were generally going to be based on Islam, but their personal worships, because for example, they could even like brew alcohol and stuff because if it's linked to their religion, right? Those weren't harmed. Their marriages and their divorce and those type of rules could still be referred back to their own beliefs. But the societal issues would have been based on Islam. But I can double check that. But I would, I'll have a read around. But because that's news to me.
No, I want to make clear. I'm not saying that Muawiyah didn't rule by Sharia, but he was much more accommodating to the Christians under him, under his authority.
Sure. Yeah,
so
yeah,
he was very accommodating to them. And then after he died, there was several years of warfare and confusion between the time of Yazid and the rise of Abdul Malik, the reestablishment. So society kind of broke down during that period anyway in Syria. Okay. And when Abdul Malik came, he was much more strict about implementing Islam. And he began to, I don't know that Muawiyah enforced the rule of no new churches, things like that. I would be very surprised if Muawiyah would have enforced that rule. Abdul Malik almost certainly enforced it.
Is he the one who ordered the cathedral in Damascus to be destroyed, and then they rebuilt it as the great masjid of Damascus?
I believe that was actually started with Abdul Malik. I know there's a point, I gotta go back in my notes, but I know there's a point in time where the Muslims and Christians shared one location.
Right. The Musalla was next to the cathedral.
Right, and they shared that, and eventually the Muslim population grew so large it was overtaking the Christian population, and they eventually had to, I don't know if they, I also know that Omar ibn Abdulaziz had, I gotta go back. I don't want to say that. I gotta go back. It's been a while, but Umar ibn Abdulaziz also, I won't say threatened the Christians, but they got upset about a certain cathedral that was captured during the time of Khalid ibn Walid, and they said this should really be ours. And he said, I'll let you guys have this. I gotta get the details. I'll let you guys have this. So even though we captured that one. So if I give you back this cathedral, I'm going to take all this land back. And they kind of kept quiet about that. So I got to go back into it. But definitely by Abdul Malik's reign, he was more forceful in implementing Islam as the dominant legal system, dominant political system. And one of the things that he did was that, I know this is going off track, but one of the things that he did that was remarkable was that during the time of Muawiyah and all the way up until Abdul Malik, paper came from, papyrus really came from Egypt, and that was still dominated by mostly Christians, Coptic Christians of Egypt. They dominated the production of papyrus, and this is why I got prepared. I'm sorry, but the point is that the Christians were, if I remember correctly, they were reluctant to include the phrase Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim on papers or edicts in the papyrus that they were sending to the Muslim Empire. And I will get my information on this, and I'll come back to you on that one, because I want to make sure I can tell you the right thing.
I
sure. But I don't want to waste your time on this one. But we'll come back to it now. I'll probably have to come back to you later on that one, inshallah, because I don't want to say the wrong thing. And,
cool.
Okay, but I know the other things you want to talk about as far as the.
To be honest with you, bro, I think as Maghrib is
oh, that's right. You're
yeah.
You're 6 hours ahead. My bad. Okay.
Time is limited here because what I wanted to speak about was generally about first of all about your podcast, just for you to maybe even just big it up a little, because it deserves that. Also, actually, I want to get your view on even the sort of like what your thoughts were on the Rabi al-Awwal, the Mawlid celebrations and stuff like this. But that was something that came up today because I wrote a blog on this. But what I wanted to talk about, and maybe if we can kind of like, I don't know if we're even going to do this justice or whether we need a part 2 of this episode, yeah? But right. I was thinking on speaking about, because from your podcast, there's some good things that I took and it made me think how the Mongols, the destroyers of Baghdad, and some scholars say that the Muslim Ummah has never even recovered from what happened, the destruction in Baghdad, right?
Yeah,
how ultimately these people became Muslim.
Right.
And this is fascinating. And I wanted to discuss more about this with you. And also the other thing which I listened to in your podcast, which I thought was really interesting. And I think wider people, the people, listeners should know about this as well. It's really interesting how the Mongols, as in the people who destroyed many of the Muslim states, the Khwarezmizi state, if that's how you pronounce it. Syria, what they did in Baghdad, how unintentionally they set the foundation stones of the rise of three powerhouses in the Muslims, being the Ottomans, being the Mughals, and being the Safavids.
Right.
Safavids, I take that with a bit of, with a pinch of salt, as being include them generally in the Muslim states, but I found that fascinating. And what I thought was, and I know in the podcast, so there's two ways: either you listen to Brother Muttaqi's season 8, or we can discuss it. I found that's really, really interesting. And also, what I wanted to speak about as well was, more recently, as we know what's happening in India, Muslims are having a hard time in India. And one thing that's been pushed for many years now is this narrative that Muslims are foreign to India. Muslims are, foreign invaders. And we see, for example, many things have been, over the past few years, have been changed from Mughal names to Hindu names, right?
Yeah, I noticed that.
So I wanted to just chat about that as well, how in reality, I mean, listening to your podcast, and as you know anyway, and this is actually, alhamdulillah, this is the reason why we actually even got in contact in the first place, is I love history too, and certainly Islamic history, right? And your podcast is probably the best Islamic history podcast in the world at the moment. But what was interesting was, if you think about the Delhi Sultanate and all these guys came way before the Mughals.
Right.
So do actually Muslims even appreciate how long the Muslims not only have a presence, but actually ruled major parts of India? So they're the sort of things, bro, that I want to discuss. But I think unless you can kind of wrap it up in a 10-minute, in a 10-minute answer, or whether it deserves its own podcast, I'll let you decide. But I think time is of the essence at the moment, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, regarding the Mongols, one of the things about the Mongols is that they were mostly nomadic people, and so they didn't have a strong culture of their own. They didn't really establish too many cities until Genghis Khan. They started establishing cities, but they didn't come from a long tradition of stable, settled people. They were mostly nomads. And so while they were great fighters and great conquerors, and to a certain extent even decent legislators, because Genghis Khan did have a code of law of his own that was eventually passed out much of the empire. They weren't good with cultural things. And so wherever they conquered, they tended to adopt the culture of the people that they conquered. And so when they conquered a huge portion of the Muslim world, and people often forget that most of Central Asia is Muslim. All the stands, Kazakhstan to Tajikistan,
Uzbekistan,
Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, of course. Pakistan doesn't really count, but it's different because that came afterward.
Kyrgyzstan, all these stands.
All these places were conquered during the Umayyad dynasty by Muslims, and even though they're mostly Buddhist at this time, but they were still conquered during the Umayyad dynasty, and over a few generations, even after the Umayyad dynasty fell apart and the Abbasids came and they began to recede, they still, by that time, Islam had been established. So these are Muslim empires, kingdoms, so forth and so on.
So here we're talking about Bukhara, Samarkand.
Yes, especially Uzbekistan. I was surprised to find out that, Ibn Tirmidhi is the great Hadith scholar, is named after Tirmiz, the city in Uzbekistan. So
okay, yes, Tirmidhi.
Yeah, I didn't realize that until I went to the meaning of the name. Samarkand was the capital of Timur's empire. Though he was a brutal conqueror, he was still Muslim at least. He was still Muslim. He killed a bunch of Muslims on his own, of course, but But even beyond that, so basically Islam was already there. And so by the time Genghis Khan came around, Islam was well established throughout much of Central Asia. It was the ruling faith throughout most of Central Asia. And so when they conquered these lands, because they didn't really have much culture of their own as nomads, they eventually, over a couple of generations, adopted Islam. The opposite happened when they conquered much of China, because The only part of the world that suffered more than the Muslims did was China, and the Mongols, they brutalized China, but eventually those who conquered China wound up accepting Chinese values, and eventually became Buddhists or Confucianists or whatever different faiths were in. They conquered in China. They took up most of those, but they conquered much more of the Muslim land than they did of China. They did conquer most of China, but just the Muslim land is so much more bigger than China, so it's much more. And so after a few generations, they began accepting Islam. So by the time Tamerlane or Timur came to prominence, he had already come from at least 3 or 4 generations of Muslims by then. His father was Muslim, his grandfather was Muslim, so he was already Islam was already well established in the region that he was, and even he married one of Genghis Khan's descendants. I think it's his Genghis Khan's great granddaughter, something like that. But she was already Muslim too. So these things, yeah, they had already accepted it. The reason why is mostly the fact that the Mongols didn't really have an established culture, a very strong culture of their own. So wherever they conquered, they generally accepted whatever over future.
One quick counter then, because what that could indicate is that it wasn't due to Islam being the correct deen. It was just because they adopted it. However, even if we think about Hulagu Khan, right? His wife was Christian.
Yeah.
So someone could argue, well, they could have easily become Christians. If you know what I mean. I just want to clarify, because it might just seem that these people, it's not like they kind of understood the Shahada and that they saw Islam as being the truth. They just adopted it because that's where they were ruling. I just want to give them a bit more, do a bit more justice to them, justice to them.
Okay. Well, the thing is that once they conquered a land, and they will have to hire or put Muslims in high places. They have to, because they have to rule. They can't kill all the Muslims. And only place where Muslims were wholesale slaughtered were when they resisted. And there was only a few examples of that. Usually, once one example was made, that kind of ended the resistance at that. So with Baghdad, actually, a interesting fact was that, and this is I don't want to get into a Sunni Shia debate, but I think I mentioned it during the podcast. Was that
I think there was some treachery involved, right?
Yeah, well, there's lots of accusation that the Shiites of Baghdad or of that region collaborated with the Mongols in overthrowing the Abbasid, which is a Sunni dynasty. And so once the Mongols took over, they put Shiites in high positions. And as far as Baghdad was concerned, outside of Baghdad, that's different. But any place that would have any other place they would have went into, once they conquered the place, the Mongols would have put Muslims in high positions. They would have had to collaborate with Muslims. So there's an example of, I think, Berke Khan, who was against the wholesale slaughter of certain Muslim locations, and it was his grandson, I believe, who wound up accepting Islam. Now, the thing is that it's not that they just came and they just adopted Islam by osmosis. That's not. Of course, people would have been given dawah to them. They would have had Muslim ministers. They would have figured out, well, how can we handle these new lands that we conquered. They would have had to learn about the people that they are now ruling over, and that would naturally come. There will naturally be some discussion about what is Islam, and eventually people would have been. Some of the Mongol rulers would have accepted Islam wholesale and come into it out of faith, not just out of. These are rulers now. These weren't, rulers don't accept Islam by osmosis. They accept it because they believe in it. And there was a certain point, and I'll have to go do more research into it. There's a certain point where there was discussion within the different Mongol Khanates, which was the empires that came up after the overall Mongol Empire began to disintegrate. These huge Khanates, which was like small empires in and of themselves, where there's discussion within the Mongol ruling dynasties about how they're going to accept Islam, or should they pass rulership on to Muslims or the children who accepted Islam. It just, to me, it speaks more of the inevitability of Islam. I don't really think of it as so much as, well, this to me, I've always seen this as the inevitability. In this country that we live in now, the United States or the UK, it is the inevitability. And whether it comes through passive acceptance or assertive or aggressive acceptance, whether it comes through, is very rarely been through, convert or die. That's very, very, very rarely happened in Islam. But I think the system that Allah has put in place naturally brings people to it. And who would have thought that in our day and age, that the over liberalization, which I was always concerned was going to be now I won't say the downfall of Islam, but a huge impediment to the acceptance of Islam, was actually the gateway to bring people into Islam, or at least expose people to Islam. That the rainbow culture and the alphabet crew, that their overabundance would make people say, now maybe we should look at Islam. After 20 years of so-called war and terrorism, of hundreds of thousands of Muslims being killed around the world, that we only know about Iraq and Afghanistan. So many other Muslims have been killed by drone strikes and all sorts of covert operations. Constant, the Robert Spencers, he's just one guy. There's so many professional anti-Muslim people out there, anti-Muslim crew, I don't know how else to call them, who have made millions of dollars, have built, massive careers off of demonizing Islam. Despite all that, modern technology going against us and all that, Islam still continues to progress. So I see it as how it happens, I don't care. so long as Islam winds up victorious, and to me, like I said, I used to see it as the inevitability of Islam. So whether the Mongols accepted it by just because everybody else has all become Muslim too, or where they say someone actually came to them and gave them dua and made them see the truth of Islam, I don't care. So long as they became Muslim and they established Islam wherever they ruled, that's what's most important. So like you said, I know I probably went over my 10 minutes, but I'll try to wrap it up. With the Mughals of India, even though they weren't the greatest individual people, they still tried to implement some form. They had to roll back a lot. I don't say roll back. They had to be passive or less assertive on many rules of Islam because they were ruling over a Hindu majority or a non-Muslim majority. So they had to roll back certain things. But still, that allowed Islam to become established. It allowed Islam to spread all the way south to the point where even in the southern part of India, where they didn't really rule, you can still see Islam is always the second largest religion in every Indian state, pretty much. It's always the second largest religion all over. And
quick question on that one then, Brother Muttaqi. The sort of mass conversion of people, of Muslims in India, and then later on, most of them went to Pakistan or the new state of Pakistan. I'm not sure if you have this information. It just came to mind. Majority of this conversion, do you think it came during the time of the Mughals?
Probably not always. The Deccan Sultanates, the Delhi Sultanates, they existed before the Mughals came around, and they already had a fairly large Muslim population at that point in time, and they had been there for centuries already. I would say that I think a lot of there's I had to do more research on, because the Mughals, I should say, weren't like the Ottomans deliberately sent da'is into the Balkans to spread Islam. I haven't read where the Mughals did that, where they I haven't read where they deliberately sent da'is into the Hindu nations and everything to try to convert them to Islam. I've heard some things, actually, though this is from a Hindu scholar, so I got to give it a grain of salt, that Hindus actually resisted conversion to Islam for so long. And I would say that I think it's just the numbers. So I think because there's so many people in India, and the Balkans were sparsely populated then and now. Whereas in India, it was, millions of people there, hundreds of millions of people now, almost a billion. I think it's like a billion people now. So even back then, it was a huge population. I think Islam just may have spread, not necessarily slowly, but I think it was just because there's so many people there, the people who converted to Islam, who accepted Islam, didn't match how many people did not, by any means. There was entire Rajput tribes who became Muslim. So
maybe I'd even say, and I know I've taken you off your point, and we'll get back onto that. It's maybe what it shows actually is maybe the lack of intention by the Mughals. Otherwise, the Hindus, there were, if you do some research, the concept of Hindustan and this unified Hindu population, it was made up by the British, right?
Right. Yeah.
So these people were subdued. Generally, they were subdued, and had the rulers forced them, right, over generations, you would imagine that they would have accepted it. So I think it probably shows the lack of any effort, probably, which is what you're saying is difference between the Ottomans. Anyway, going back to you, bro.
Okay. Well, to me, I've got a point I was trying to make also, but the point is that I believe that Islam is inevitable. I hear sometimes, I can't remember this guy's name. I don't want to say his name anyway. But there's a popular atheist tech guru who is very anti-Islam, and I'm trying to remember his name. It's not. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll remember it afterwards. But you sometimes see. I mean, to me, it's just mind-boggling how. I don't want to get too arrogant because everything is with Allah and ultimately. But it's just amazing that despite all of the impediments that the Western world have put against Muslims and against Islam, Islam just continues to march forward. And it's just against, indescribable odds, military, financial, technical. We are behind in every single aspect, and Islam still continues to march on and spread. And I just think that, as Allah says in the Quran, and I'll say the English, but inevitably the victory is with Allah and His Messenger in the end. And I know the Arabic, I don't want to mess it up right now, but still, Islam is inevitable. And alhamdulillah, I think, all of these, the downfall of the conquest of the Mongols, even though it did result in the loss of a lot of Islamic knowledge because they destroyed, you know the story about them throwing the books into the river and into the Euphrates or the Tigris and it all turning black with all the ink and all that's probably true. And the number of scholars that were killed and everything, all that's probably true. But without them, we wouldn't have, I won't say we wouldn't have Timur because Timur's kind of was rough, but still we wouldn't have the Safavids. We might have the Safavids and none of the Safavids, but the Ottomans and the Mughals, you might have still had something like them, maybe, but I don't know. Allah's plan is complex. Mm-hmm.
On that note, bro, what I'm going to say is if the listeners and people watching this, if you want to understand how the Mongols unintentionally assisted in setting up these great powerhouses as the Ottomans and the Mughals, and certainly the Ottomans, because they were different, vastly different from the Safavids and from the Mughals, and what they did for the Ummah, that's a lasting legacy over hundreds of years. However, as Brother Muttaqi said, this is the great plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Had the Mongols not done that, had Genghis Khan not wanted to unify. But anyway, listen, we can't go back, right? That's all bogus. Yeah. What I would say, my point is, guys, check out season 8 of the Islamic History podcast. It's fantastic. And it goes into a lot of detail, and it'll explain to you as well how the Mongols assisted in the Ottomans and the Safavids and the Mughals to come about, and who in positive, negative, whichever way, they left an imprint. They left their fingerprints in the history of Islam, which cannot be removed. So, Brother Muttaqi, on that note, the podcast, mashallah ta'ala, didn't go as I had planned, but it's gone better. It's gone better, right?
That's good.
And I just think it was probably too long. It's been taking too long to get you back on. And I'm all up with just, up for regularly just having these chit chats with yourself, recording it in a podcast, because I'm sure I benefited from the many discussions we had. And I'm sure the people listening and watching this will do as well. So guys, a quick plug for Islamic History Podcast. You can it's available on all popular podcast platforms. Also, Brother Muttaqi has his channel. You have now an Instagram channel, and I think now you're on TikTok.
Yeah, I don't do too much on TikTok, but YouTube channel is available now also. And season 9 is available and is going on YouTube somewhat simultaneously as a podcast. I try to keep them, but
I've not actually checked the YouTube.
It's I'll send you a link to it. But yeah, we have the first 2 episodes, and episode 3 for season 9 should be available soon.
But is season 8 on YouTube?
Not yet. It's going to take me a while to get around to that. But season 9, I've learned to record at the same time. This is why I have this wonderful background now. So I've got myself a little bit set up now. So awesome. Season 9 is there, but it's only a couple of episodes, mostly Akbar and Jahangir right now. But still, you can go listen to it, inshallah.
No, brilliant. So yeah, definitely people check it out. And also, if you have the time, I've recorded a few podcasts with Brother Muttaqi. The first one, which one was really important, why history, Islamic history is important. This is not an academic topic. Brother Muttaqi doesn't do this just as a hobby. Everything he learns, inshallah ta'ala, benefits him and his understandings of Islam and its history and what it means to be a Muslim. On that note, Brother Muttaqi, inshallah ta'ala, until the next one, Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.